He trampled your rights for 35 years, then quietly slipped away with a government pension in hand. This exit is being applauded by some, but to others, this feels more like a sneaky escape than an actual reckoning. In this video, we'll talk about the forced resignation of Marvin Richardson, the ATF's former deputy director, whose past actions continue to stir outrage among firearm owners across the country. We'll get into how he orchestrated aggressive rules on pistol braces, how he went after home-built firearms, and how he turned the ATF into a tool aimed squarely at lawful gun owners. We'll also touch on his behind-the-scenes collaboration with Biden's transition team in 2020, right under the Trump administration's nose, and explain how that set the stage for regulatory crackdowns. If you're someone who's been warning about federal overreach for years, or you're just starting to see how these agencies operate, you'll want to stick around. So, as I mentioned earlier, rather than face criminal charges for the chaos he helped unleash, this guy is departing on his own terms. Before we dig deeper, what do you think about this entire situation? Comment down below if you believe forced retirement is enough, or if folks in positions of power should answer in a court of law when they impose unconstitutional measures. Marvin Richardson wasn't just any bureaucrat. He joined the ATF back in 1989, starting out as a special agent in the Dallas Field Division. He was there during the WACO siege. Over the decades, he climbed the ranks, stepping into leadership roles in Phoenix, Denver, and eventually the agency's headquarters in Washington, D.C. By 2019, Richardson had become deputy director, and then he briefly served as acting director in 2021 and 2022. This guy was known internally for his ability to steer policy and guide enforcement strategies, but if you think about it, he's the face of an agency that was getting more brazen by the year. There was zero accountability. Under his watch, the ATF got bolder in reclassifying previously acceptable firearms accessories, and it expanded its enforcement footprint without going through proper legislative channels. If you look at his resume on paper, it's full of awards and promotions. He was recognized for his role in shaping the Bureau's operations and for overseeing critical divisions like enforcement programs and services. The problem, at least from a Pro 2A's perspective, is that he used that authority to push measures that stepped on the rights of law-abiding people. This wasn't a case of dealing with criminals who were blatantly breaking the law. Instead, under his leadership, the ATF moved closer to punishing regular citizens by labeling them felons overnight for possessing items that had previously been permitted. Many in the firearms community recall the tension that escalated when the ATF began tightening the noose on pistol braces and privately made firearms. They saw it as a sign that the agency would keep testing the boundaries of what it could regulate, even without a clear green light from Congress. Richardson's actions over the years were more than just misjudgments. He presided over new guidelines and policies that ignited waves of distrust, frustration, and even legal battles. Although there were internal voices in the Department of Justice reminding the ATF to maintain a degree of restraint, Richardson kept forging ahead. He was responsible for the ATF's transformation from an agency that enforced established law into one that wrote new rules through a backdoor process. When an official becomes the driving force behind major rule changes that affect millions of firearms owners, it's only logical that he'd face the community's wrath. Despite that history, and despite a 35-year career that many argue led to blatant breaches of people's rights, his exit comes wrapped in a veneer of respectability. This is why so many are up in arms about him being able to resign without legal consequences. The frustration only grows when we roll back to November 2020, right after the election, but before any official certification. While the outcome was still contested and President Trump was fighting for a path forward, Richardson and acting director Regina Lombardo sat down with Biden's transition team to lay out a plan for targeting pistol braces and 80% lowers. This meeting happened quietly, without Trump's knowledge or approval, at a time when the Department of Justice had explicitly instructed the ATF's industry side not to pursue new regulations on braces. Despite that directive, Richardson seemed determined to move forward. He apparently believed the ATF didn't have the political cover to do it right then, but once a new administration arrived, he was confident they could execute those plans. The infamous honey badger case from QLLC in New Hampshire still sparks frustration among those who follow these developments. Previously classified as a pistol, the honey badger got a cease and desist letter from the ATF, claiming it was actually a short-barreled rifle, thus subject to heavy restrictions under the National Firearms Act. A big chunk of the firearms community saw this as a case of, one day it's fine, the next day you're a criminal. especially because the ATF's own rules on braces had been anything but consistent. Pressure from the Trump DOJ and a massive backlash forced the ATF to back off temporarily. But Richardson and his allies within the agency did not abandon their interest in tightening regulations. They just waited for more favorable political wins. Once Biden took office, the ATF gained the momentum it needed to clamp down on pistol braces, ghost guns, and gun dealers through what became known as a zero-tolerance policy. That zero-tolerance approach led to a dramatic spike in federal firearm license revocations, putting lots of mom-and-pop gun shops at risk of closing down over what some considered trivial infractions. Paperwork errors, missing documents, anything that could be interpreted as a violation, became a reason to yank someone's license. Firearm owners, especially those who have purchased from small businesses, saw this as a deliberate attempt to cut down on the availability of firearms and bully dealers into giving up their licenses out of fear. While the ATF claimed this was all in the name of safety, the logic didn't sit well with those who believe law-abiding Americans should have the right to buy and sell firearms without government intimidation. The significance of these events grew after Biden officially took office. Richardson found himself in a position of considerable influence, driving initiatives that many argued had no genuine basis in law. Rather than waiting for Congress to pass regulations concerning pistol braces or homemade firearms, the ATF under Richardson treated these items as illegal by executive decree. The community that respects the Second Amendment regarded it as an organized effort to shrink their rights without a proper legislative process. Then, as President Trump won his second term, the pendulum swung back. On February 7, 2025, Trump signed a major executive order called Protecting Second Amendment Rights, instructing Attorney General Pam Bondi to start dismantling Biden-era firearm rules. This set the stage for confrontation between the administration and top ATF officials like Richardson. Shortly after that, on February 20th, a group of 30 senators sent a pointed letter to Richardson. They wanted him to undo the engaged in the business rule that was nudging the country toward universal background checks, end the pistol brace rule that effectively transformed braced pistols into short-barreled rifles, revoke the so-called ghost gun rule that targeted kits and 80% frames, and eliminate the zero-tolerance policy against FFLs. They also called on him to destroy Form 4473 records older than 20 years, records that many believe the ATF has been quietly amassing in a de facto registry. All these demands struck at the core of what the ATF had become under Biden's watch and under Richardson's guidance. Yet, instead of responding with a swift course correction, Richardson barely budged. He stayed silent in the face of mounting political and legal pressure. Then, out of nowhere, came the news of his forced retirement, arranged so he wouldn't be outright fired. The question burning in the mind of every pro-2A person is how someone can spend years imposing policies that run counter to the Bill of Rights, only to walk away with a respectable send-off and presumably secure a comfortable pension. Many of us are left wondering if this is justice, or just a well-timed bit of political maneuvering designed to diffuse public outrage. Not surprisingly, the community has spoken out with passion. If you scroll through comments on social media, you see people calling for real consequences. They're asking why, after so many attempts to tighten the vice on gun rights, nobody is being held accountable in a courtroom. Why do federal employees get to violate the Second Amendment, step away when the pressure mounts, and then collect taxpayer-funded benefits? Some argue that, at the bare minimum, Richardson's pension should be frozen or slashed, given the disservice he performed for decades. Others take a harsher stance, claiming he ought to face prosecution for actively working against the Constitution he was supposed to uphold. Whatever your stance, it's hard to deny there's a sense that this resignation is a convenient way to clean house without rocking the boat too much. There's another layer to the story, too. Kash Patel, who had been acting director at the ATF, was removed around the same time, and the Trump administration brought in Army Secretary Dan Driscoll to run the Bureau on an interim basis. Driscoll's background includes Army Ranger School, service in Iraq, and a stint at Yale Law. He's close to Vice President J.D. Vance, which suggests he might lean toward pro-freedom policies, but nobody knows for sure how he'll handle the existing rules on pistol braces, ghost guns, and FFL revocations. Those who care about the Second Amendment are watching him closely. We don't need someone who we're not sure is actually pro-Second A. Either we put in someone like Brandon Herrera, who openly backs the right to keep and bear arms without loopholes or shady rulemaking, Or we accept that the ideal scenario is for the ATF to be dismantled entirely and for both the NFA and GCA to be repealed. Because if we simply swap one suit for another, there's no guarantee that the agency's mission will pivot in a meaningful way. Too often, new leadership means new faces, yet the same approach to restricting firearms remains. All this leads to the question, will anything really change? If the agency continues to operate under the same mentality, gun owners could face more attempts at backdoor legislation. That's why so many people want an overhaul of the system, not just a staff shakeup at the top. Removing a key figure is a step, but without scrapping the rules he championed, that step feels incomplete. For instance, the pistol brace rule is still making many law-abiding owners vulnerable to felonies if they don't navigate the maze of NFA regulations. The so-called ghost gun rule hasn't vanished just because Richardson did. And there's still the mountain of paperwork for the zero-tolerance approach that may have destroyed businesses without any legitimate cause. Unless these rules are rescinded in their entirety, gun owners won't feel a sense of resolution. That's exactly why a loud chorus is demanding that the next person who runs the ATF immediately end these restrictions and ensure that legally purchased items are not turned into contraband on a whim. They want to see FFLs get their licenses back if those licenses were taken unfairly. They're also asking for tens of thousands of old Form 4473s to be removed from federal databases to prevent the creation of a registry that tracks every gun owner in the country. Another key demand is modernizing the process for people who want to buy NFA items. If we're serious about upholding the Second Amendment, no one should have to wait months or years for an approval that could theoretically happen in minutes. Richardson's quiet exit is seen by a segment of the community as a small step forward. One less anti-gun bureaucrat might lower the temperature. However, he wasn't the only individual pushing these rules, and the system that allowed him to flourish for over 3 decades still remains. This is why you hear so many calls for dismantling the ATF altogether. In the eyes of a lot of gun owners, that agency has gone well beyond a point of no return. As long as it exists in its current form, there's always a possibility of new rules that infringe on liberty inch by inch. I don't know about you, but a quiet resignation feels like getting off way too easy. So, what's your take on this? Are you glad he's finally out? Or do you think he should have been dragged into court and held accountable? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And while you're here, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and tap that bell so you don't miss the next one. Appreciate you watching.